traveling through another dimension. A dimension not only of sight and sound, but of mind. A journey into a wondrous land whose boundaries are that of imagination. Your next stop, the Twilight Zone.
YouTube, and welcome back to my channel, and welcome back to another 31 Days of Spook. And today we are going to talk about another experiment. It's called the Scole experiment, and this is scientific evidence for life after death. So the Scole experiment took place in 1993 in Scole, Norfolk. And I do believe that the original group was, or had 7 members, but while just going back, because I did read the previous version of this, but this is the updated version. It talks about all of the technology that came out of the experiment. But some of the original members were Arthur Ellison and Montague Keene, who are now deceased. And I think I read that this particular group is still in contact with them in whatever afterlife there is. But some other members were Alan and Diana Bennett, who were the mediums. They contacted the spirits. And then Robin and Sandra Fay, which in the paragraph I read, it seemed more like they contributed to the Scole group more after the experiment happened, but I don't know. But then what makes this experiment different than other experiments is that they had a plethora of other scientists come in and participate in this experiment. So we have scientists from NASA, Stanford University, and the Institute of Noetic Sciences, from wherever. And then some astrophysicists actually started their own group after attending one of these experiments, and they even had TV personalities and other mediums come in and participate in the experiment. And just to really give you an idea of how the experiment went, is they started in 1993, and it was around 1997 or 98 that the experiment stopped. And during that time, it says that the data flowing from other dimensions had increased in volume from a drip to a stream to a torrent. Then with very little warning or explanation, something apparently happened that forced the communicators to turn off the tap. So that's just a little idea of how this experiment went. It started from, I guess I would say, from like disembodied voices to tapping or being touched to actual tables being lifted off the floor and being spun in midair, and then to even more evidence I'm going to talk about. So the way the Scole room was set up is, it was like a cellar or a basement at some point, and it was retrofitted to be an acceptable place to hold an experiment. And so there was the room, and then there was a door to get in and out. And I don't believe there was any windows. And the sessions would take place in the dark. And just some more reasons of why the Scole experiment is, it's detailed as being the most important experiment for life after death to exist. And one of the reasons it's so, I guess it's not well known, but like held in high standard, is because one of the reasons, because it moved from, they would take place in the cellar, but then they did like what YouTubers do. They take they travel across the country and whatever and do shows and stuff. So this kind of did what YouTubers do. So one of the reasons that the experiments were taken to the USA was so that objective investigators could experience the phenomena firsthand. Investigators considered it important to show that the phenomena was replicable outside the confines of the Scole cellar, which in the scientific community, they really wanted to be replicable in different types of situations. A review of the testimonies collected from those who attended the sessions illustrates that the phenomena occurred in the US in the same way it had in the UK. This US investigation was very important to the credibility of the Scole experiment. Like, some of the paranormal stuff that would happen during this overseas investigation would be that one report was that a Native American materialized and performed a tribal dance enchanted by scientists who attended this experiment. But going back to the UK and talking about the experiment, the Scole group would enter the cellar and they would start their session. And usually they would come into contact with a gatekeeper of other dimensions or a guide to help them with the communication they were doing. And this is just a quote from, I guess, their first contact with said spirit. It says, "My name is Manu. I am the gatekeeper between the dimensions. When last on Earth, I lived in what you now call South America. The team of beings I represent is made up of many thousands of minds from the many other realms of existence. We will be working with your group to provide very tangible evidence of the reality of these other realms. Our plan is to pioneer important methods of communication between the dimensions using energy rather than the more traditional methods of ectoplasm. This very evening, it is time for the new work to begin." And I think I read it as the spirits wanted to find new ways of being able to use medium to communicate, because ectoplasm can be kind of dangerous to the human host. So they wanted to try to figure out new ways of, or figure out new energy that they could use to be able to communicate. But as I said earlier, the Scole group was doing the experiments, and what first started out as tapping or being touched or disembodied voices became increasingly more intense, and eventually the paranormal phenomena had built up to a point where things could actually apparate into a room. So apparate is is like when something appears out of nowhere and it becomes corporeal. So they would have things such as jewelry, coins, newspaper appear into the room, and these things wouldn't appear quietly. If a coin, now let's do the newspaper. There was a apparition of a newspaper, and the noise it made could be equivalent to maybe someone hitting a table with a baseball bat. That's how loud these, if the item was larger, then the noise would be larger. If the item was smaller, then the noise would be smaller once it appeared into the room. And I don't mean it was hitting the surface of a table or anything. It would just simply be the energy that goes off when the item appeared. And on top of items appearing, there was a separate experiment within the experiment. So the spirits wanted to try to manipulate matter. They wanted to use an unopened roll of film and imprint images and messages on it. So the Scole group had originally had a unopened roll of film, and they would place it under a dome. And it was during each session the spirits would try to imprint images on it. And it was during one of the independent experiments, the spirits wanted to send some instructions for building a device that would help spirit communication or verbal spirit communication be better. And you kind of need a smart person to develop that kind of technology, right? So this is some picture evidence of a roll of film that had instructions for such a device imprinted on it. Now, as you can see, we have a diagram of how it should be built, and then some instructions right here with some initials at the end. So this imprinted itself on a roll of film. And I can't remember if it was, I think once scientists had started to come in to the experiment, they were able to view and participate in the experiment. They wanted to make the conditions for tampering less probable. So eventually the dome became a wooden box that scientists came up with to prevent tampering, and it's a wooden security box which was padlocked and everything, and they would place the film in there. And I think it was this instance that the film was in this box, and even if you couldn't get into the box, but scientists actually handled the film afterwards to take it to be developed. So if the Scole group really wanted to have it tampered with, they would have had to have known where the scientist was taking it, who was developing the film, and have that person tamper with it. But according to this film, the geranium receptor and instructions were received on 11 January 1997. The electrical diagram was to help Professor Ellison assist the group in altering the receptor to enable verbal communication between the Scole group and the spirit team. Spirit voices were first heard on 21st January 1997. A milestone in transdimensional communication had been achieved. And if you're not sold already, remember that I said that there were some initials down at the end of the film. So they believe that the initials belong to Thomas Edison. And so it says here that the TAE signature appeared on the far right of the geranium receptor filmed during a session at Scole on 11 January 1997. It is not known what the 888 means. For comparison, the group obtained a copy of Thomas Edison's monogrammatic signature from an original document dated 25th May 1925 from the Edison Institute in the USA. And so they compared these two signatures next to each other, and it was eerily almost the same. Maybe there was something a little different here, but it was basically the same signature, leading them to believe that Thomas Edison was able to communicate from the other side, or whatever dimension they were in contact with. And then, so they were able, the spirits were able to imprint faces of people onto film. They imprinted all kinds of poetry and pictures onto it. Like on the front of this book, it has the Alpha and the Omega. This was all imprinted on a roll of film. And the paranormal activity continued to build up, and eventually the spirits wanted to try and imprint images on a video camera using, or the video camera would be set up pointing at a mirror, and then there would be other mirrors to do this and that, which sounds really weird, but you would think that you just see like orbs or light streaks or stuff like that on some of the film. But what they were able to actually see on the film once they went back to view the evidence, they could see alien faces. They got video of pyramids and other planets, and some other stuff. It was weird. Like, I really suggest this book if you want to read about experiments that deal with life after death, because it goes from a drip of paranormal activity to a torrent of paranormal activity, so much so that I mentioned earlier that the spirits were able to pick up a table and rotate it in midair in front of not only the Scole group, but in front of scientists. Which, just the fact that there were scientists participating in this experiment does give it a lot of credibility for me personally. But yeah, and then eventually, for some reason, the spirits wanted to stop communicating. I think that there was an outside force trying to work its way into what they were doing, and they just wanted to take some precaution to make sure whatever it was couldn't get through, but the experiment eventually stopped. But yeah, that's just a little bit about this experiment. This is probably my favorite experiment I've ever read about. But this is the Scole experiment by Grant and Jane Solomon. If you want to go and get yourself a copy and read about life after death. But yeah, that's just a little video I have for you today. If you like this video, then hit the like button. If you want to see me react to more books, then leave me some interest comments. If you have any suggestions for future videos, then leave me some interest comments. And if you haven't already, subscribe. Alright, bye guys.